skeletal muscles never completely relax, even when we're resting. That is what we call muscle tone. So it's the resting tension in skeletal muscle that's generated by the involuntary nervous system. So limited number of motor units within a muscle are randomly stimulated at any given time, and that helps to maintain, some muscle tension. So specific motor units are being stimulated during rest, and they change continuously, so the motor units don't become fatigued. So this random contraction of those motor units causes the skeletal muscle to develop tension. We call it the resting muscle tone. So random contractions like that don't generate enough tension to cause movement. Now, muscle tone does decrease during deep sleep. So think about if you've ever picked a child up when they are asleep versus a child that's awake. So an awake child has muscle tone. A sleeping child has temporarily decreased their muscle tone. So which one is most difficult to carry? Of course, that sleeping child, because their body is less rigid, and because they're asleep, they're really not helping you. They're not hanging on. All right, now let's take a quick look at some types of contraction. If you remember from previous conversations, you should know that iso means same. Metric means length. So an isometric contraction is when the skeletal muscle contracts, the tension increases, but the muscle length stays the same. I'm sorry, guys, my phone's going off. Give me just a moment to turn that down. Okay, my apologies. So I think of an isometric contraction like if you are holding a book out in front of you, but you're not raising or lowering that book. You are simply holding a weight while your arm does not move. Isotonic, again, iso means same. Tonic refers to tension. So the muscle tension overcomes the resistance, and that results in movement. So the tension or the tone stays the same, but the length changes. Think of that as doing biceps curls, or you pick up your book, you let it down to in front of you. So if you're holding your book in both hands and you raise it up towards your chest and then lower it down toward your thighs, you are keeping the tension the same because the book is not changing, but the length of your muscle is changing. So isotonic, the muscle length changes, but the force against it, the tension, the tone stays the same. And within your isotonics, we have two different types. That is concentric, where the muscle shortens as it contracts. Again, like your biceps brachii when you're picking up something or lifting weights. Eccentric, the muscle lengthens. So that would be when you are lowering the weight or the book. Either way, if it shortens, it's concentric. If it lengthens, it's eccentric. But they are both types of isotonic because the tension, the weight, did not change. The muscle length did. So what happens to your muscles when you exercise? Well, it depends on what type of exercise you do. Endurance, which is aerobic exercise, or exercise that is going to provide more resistance and muscle building. So endurance exercise, moderate activity that increases your heart rate, like when you're running for a few miles. These changes that occur to your skeletal muscles include increasing the number of mitochondria and the enzymes in the mitochondria, which mean you can make more ATP through aerobic respiration. Increase in the enzymes that we use to convert fatty acids into something we can make ATP from. So more cellular respiration. Increase in enzymes need for converting lactate back to pyruvate so we can get more ATP. So endurance exercises also are going to induce changes to your cardiovascular system. The heart wall is going to thicken. That increases the amount of blood that can be pumped out as long as it doesn't get too thick, right? Growing additional blood vessels, because as muscles change, we need to grow new vessels, especially if we're creating additional muscle tissue. So these changes are going to provide more efficient delivery of blood. Now, why is that important? Yeah, I hear some of you out there saying ATP. And actually, yes, that is the answer. Because if you're pumping out more blood, you're delivering more oxygen, which means you make more, ATP. Resistance exercise produces powerful muscle contractions like weightlifting. So that results in stronger skeletal muscles. It stimulates the muscle fibers to increase the contractile proteins, actin and myosin, especially in those fast glycolytic muscles. So these changes primarily result in an increase in the muscle size, and we call that hypertrophy. Hypertrophy also results from an increase in mitochondria, myoglobin, and storing more glycogen. A slight increase in ATP and creatine phosphate also occurs. And it's also been shown that some increase in the number of muscle fibers may occur. That is called hyperplasia or overgrowth. Now, atrophy can result from the lack of exercise. So atrophy is when muscle size decreases due to lack of use. This is seen frequently in anyone that has broken a bone. So let's say you break a bone in your leg and your leg is in a cast. Well, when that leg comes out of the cast, you'll notice that the muscles are significantly smaller than before the cast. Now, that is something that can initially be reversible, but if allowed to continue, it can become permanent, especially if it is an extreme case where there is a great number of atrophied tissue. And then we get old. This is a common theme in teaching A&P. What happens as we age? Well, a slow progressive loss of skeletal muscle tends to begin in your mid-30s and becomes much more noticeable after the age of 50. So muscle loses size, power, and endurance as there's a loss in the muscle fiber number and the diameter of those muscle fibers because of the decrease in the contractile myofibrils. There's a decrease in the oxygen storage capacity as the myoglobin availability decreases. Decreased circulatory supply to those muscles to supply oxygen so we can make ATP. All of this results in loss of muscle tissue. There's also a reduced capacity to recover from injury because we have a decreased number of satellite cells. Satellite cells are not really stem cells, but they're just sort of under or undeveloped myoblasts that are not really muscle cells, but they can make muscle cells. So think of them sort of like stem cells, just not really. Now, when we start losing muscle mass, very often it's replaced with fibrous connective tissue, and that, of course, is going to result in decreased flexibility.